Welcome to the Golden Hour, the podcast community where moms and moms-to-be hear stories from other mothers and top experts in the pregnancy and postpartum care field. You can visit goldenhour.fm for more information, resources, and all other episodes. You can also find us at goldenhour.fm on Instagram for comments and questions. Welcome to today's episode of the Golden Hour. I'm your host, Dr. O, and I'm joined by my dear friend, Nyssa. Nyssa Noyola grew up in a small beach town in Magnolia, Massachusetts. It's as picturesque as I can imagine. She went to boarding school in Massachusetts and then attended UPenn for undergrad and Harvard for business school. She now works at Ascendis Pharma, a Danish biotech company focused on endocrinological rare diseases. She's married to the love of her life, Pedro. He's also one of my favorites. Heart to Pedro. And they're busy raising Tommy, their spirited 4.5-year-old daughter, and Tiago, they're incredibly cute. I still envision his cheeks, 2.5-year-old son. Most importantly, her favorite ice cream flavor is Oreo. Welcome, Nyssa. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for mentioning the fun fact.
Yeah, no, I think that's crucial. I mean, who are we but our flavors? I think I'm an interesting person, but I guess I'm a basic bee because I love a good vanilla bean. I love a good vanilla bean.
Don't say that.
But it's also the brand. There's this brand that they have at Whole Foods. They are not a sponsor. I think it's called Lewin or something. And I don't know what they put in their vanilla ice cream. Stop it. Take that look off your face. That vanilla ice cream. But that's how you know it's actually really good cream and, milk, whatever they put in there. Your face hasn't changed.
Do you want to know how much this matters to me?
Oh God, is this over? Our friendship is over?
It's a deal breaker in terms of, friendships, but also who I would marry. And Pedro told me, I asked him another deal breaker. He failed that test. And then I was like, well, what's your favorite ice cream flavor? And he was like, vanilla. Amy's Mexican vanilla. And I was like, I walked out of the room because I was like, oh my God, it's over. And then a few months later, we were in Austin with his whole family. He pulled off the highway. We went to go get ice cream. I got Oreo. At Amy's, he got Amy's Mexican vanilla. I tried it. And he was like, what do you think? I was like, it's fine. And he turned to his whole family and he goes, she's racist.
You guys.
Because it's Mexican vanilla.
Yeah, because it's Mexican vanilla. It's different. It's different. I'm just saying, next time we're together in person, I'm going to get a carton of this brand of vanilla ice cream. I'm going to force it down your throat.
I'm open to trying it.
Be open. Don't judge me.
I'm open.
Wow. Let's see if we can heal from this. Let's see if we can get past this. We've only just begun. I'm so excited to have you on today, besides just our natural witty banter, mainly because you amaze me in so many different ways, but you have such a powerful, not only birth stories, but even your perspective as a mom, and most importantly, as a woman who wears various hats, right? Raising a family, but being a badass in your field. So there's so much for us to talk about. And I really want to start in, let's say, chronological order and think about what were your thoughts about motherhood when you got over the fact that Pedro's favorite ice cream flavor was vanilla and you guys decided that you loved each other and you wanted to start a family together? What were your thoughts about motherhood even before?
Yeah. It's funny because I think that there are some women who say, I always thought about being a mom. I always pictured myself as a mom and all that. I don't think I ever thought of myself as a mom or pictured myself as a mom, but somehow internally I always knew I wanted children. I just kind of felt like that was a part of a whole life. And Pedro was on board. Before we met each other, he didn't think he wanted children at all. But he says that once we got serious, he was like, nope, I just didn't want children with other people, which is very romantic to me. And then he had said, I know. And then he had said before, when we were engaged, he said, well, how soon do you think we want to have kids? And I was like, I want to just be married and flit around as a romantic couple for at least a year. And he was like, no, we're going to start to have kids right when we get married. And I was like, and then sure enough, on our honeymoon, I was like, so you want to start having kids right now? And he's like, oh my God, no. And I was like, great, let's pump the brakes. But then about a year after we got married, we were like, yeah, we really want this. So I just kind of always knew it would be a part of, if I was to be so lucky as to have kids, I always knew that it would be a part of our whole life, like a whole life to me.
Was there anything that you were nervous about when you thought about either pregnancy or motherhood?
Definitely pregnancy. I think like all of us, now that it's talked about more, although maybe not enough, like constantly was fearful that I would have a miscarriage. And so we did not tell anyone, because I didn't want to tell anyone until we were 20 weeks, which I think is pretty late. We didn't even tell our families till 20 weeks because I was just totally paranoid that, we needed to make sure that the baby was healthy and that, everything continued on its way. So I was very nervous about that. I also had aspirations to have a natural birth, as in without, why am I forgetting the word?
Without like medication, epidural?
Yes, without an epidural. Thank you. And then about motherhood, was I nervous about things? I guess the only thing I was nervous about was how to juggle it with a career, which, I guess I continue to, face and figure out and, some days seem to be in balance and most days not. But I also continue to tell myself like, but millions of women do it. So, we'll figure that part out. I guess there's one more particular thing to our situation at the time, which was, Pedro at the time was traveling every week, Monday morning at 4 a.m. till Friday night at 7 p.m. He was running a company in Colorado. And so the thought of, once that baby came along, being the only responsible parent in the state of California felt unbelievably daunting. So those are the things that come to mind.
Yeah, I did not. That seems like enough. I didn't realize that Pedro's work schedule had been like that.
It's what led us to make sure that we wanted to go the au pair route, because I was like, I need another dependable adult in this state.
Yeah, that seems fair. That's a reasonable ask. And so when you were pregnant with Tommy, how was that pregnancy for you?
Honestly, it's interesting because I think both pregnancies were tracked very similarly for me, and that I was super lucky that from day one until 8 months pregnant, I had a magical, great pregnancy. I loved being pregnant. I felt great. I felt lucky to feel great. I could still be active. I was still working. I know that a lot of women don't like the attention because it's an outward display of what's happening inward, but I actually thought it was really sweet. Older ladies would smile at me and people would ask about it. So I love that. But basically to the day with both pregnancies at my 8-month appointment, I sort of went in a huff to the appointment, like, let's get this over with, right? And like wrap it up. And in both cases, my blood pressure had shot through the roof. And in both cases on that night, and it happened to both be Fridays when Pedro and I had plans. In both cases, the OB and the nurse were like, okay, like we're gonna check you into L&D now, because like you're gonna have this baby. And I was like, no, I'm not ready. And so then the next 4 weeks were, 3 or 4 times a week going to L&D, doing stress tests and all of that, and rearranging my life and my ethos to try to manage the blood pressure. And I remember the second time it happened when I was pregnant with Tiago, just getting really emotional about it, because I was like, I've seen this movie before. Why am I getting all worked up and acting like I should do a million things all at once and pretending that I'm not 8 months pregnant and, racing around like a crazy person? I need to slow down. So I think it was my body saying, slow down and kind of ride out the next few weeks.
Yeah. I mean, I think being a human is incredibly humbling, right? Because we have these bodies that we love and we try our best to care for. But I think what makes pregnancy even more humbling is there's so many physical changes that we literally can't control. And I'm biased in that I'm team Nyssa, and I know that you're an incredibly healthy and active person. And so I can only imagine, and maybe this is me projecting, imagine if I was in your shoes, I can only imagine that feeling of being like, I'm a former field hockey star. I exercise every day. I know I'm eating right. And like, what is this blood pressure issue? Like,
Yes.
It's your cuff's wrong, not me. I could imagine that feeling. How was that for you when they made that first diagnosis?
And I look back on it and I joke with myself that like, they probably saw me walk in the office and they're like, this woman has, preeclampsia and she must have crazy blood pressure. Cause I would literally walk in and be like, let's do this. Like, come on, get me out of here. And like sweating and everything. And they were like, oh my God. And the first time I sat down, they hadn't taken my blood pressure yet. And they're like, how are things going? Great, great, great. And I said, yeah, I saw stars a few times. And you just saw the click go like, whoa, okay. We have to home in on this. And to your point about like me wanting to be active and the same, I think when I was probably 16 weeks pregnant with Tommy, we hadn't told anyone, but we'd already a long time prior signed up for a trail half marathon. And I was like, let's go. And the first mile, I was basically hyperventilating because as you would know biologically better than I do, like my heart's already overworking, right? Pumping, I don't know, 6x the volume of blood or whatever it is, better than I do. And then I was, running up hills and Pedro looked at me and he was like, if this continues for a few more minutes, we are done here. Mm-hmm. And somehow, my body sort of normalized and I was breathing and we eased into it and we did it. But again, that's a sign of like, I'm just going to do it all. And no, my body was like, no, you're not. That's not how this works.
Yeah. No, it's hard. I think, a lot of people approach pregnancy in various ways. Some people use pregnancy as a time for them to get healthy, right? They're like, okay, it's about me and the baby. What can I do to be active? Other people are like, oh, I'm used to this set point. How do I maintain? And there are various people in the middle, but sometimes it is that is those moments that make you stop and pause and say, okay, I can chill. I think I need to chill.
Yes.
It's sometimes, and it's hard. It's not easy just to have to listen to your body when you've been telling your body what to do the whole time.
Yeah, exactly.
Up until that point.
I mean, for the final 4 weeks of both pregnancies, it was like, put work down, lay on the couch, put your feet up, like put a cold compress on your forehead, take deep breaths, smell the essential oils that the nurses gave you, all of that.
Yeah. Do you think if you, and it's hindsight is 2020 and maybe it's impossible, but do you think if you didn't get these diagnoses of hypertension in both pregnancies, do you think you're someone who would have like worked all the way up until delivery and like gone, as they say, balls to the wall?
Is that a technical biological term?
It's a medical term.
Okay, yes. Got it. Yeah. And even with the first pregnancy, I think if I'm remembering correctly, my due date was like maybe a Tuesday and I did work up until the Friday, a few business days before. And then was like, great, I'll have 4 days to, chill. So 100%, if I had not been diagnosed with preeclampsia, I would have just continued to be a total maniac. And who knows, the repercussions that would have had on the babies.
Do you, there's pregnant Nyssa, there's non-pregnant Nyssa. Do you think that your experiences in your pregnancies being forced to slow down those last 4 weeks, has that informed you in your now non-pregnant life? Like, do you think you're better at finding time to slow down or remind yourself to slow down?
No, I wish.
No, that's real.
It's definitely a work in progress. I would say kids are teaching me that more than the pregnancy and the hypertension, in that I plan every minute of every day, including the weekends. And, naturally nothing is without an objective. Like, this is a true story. Like, we got on our bikes as a family on a Saturday with nothing to do. And I was like, where are we going? And Pedro was like, I don't know, whatever, around the neighborhood. I was like, to what destination? And that's just not, that's not a way to enjoy a weekend or to wind down. But B, what I've learned is that when I do that with kids, they don't react well, because it's so trite and obvious to say it, but I haven't lived it until more recently. I'm trying. The most beautiful moments are when we do nothing and twirl in the backyard. So it's more the kids that have reminded me that unplanned periods of time are healthy and wonderful and time for connection. I wish that, I'm a bad example, right? To your question, the fact that I didn't learn my lesson and I then again had hypertension at the same exact appointment with my second pregnancy shows that I learned nothing.
No, I would counter that you still did learn. Number one, like as an OB, that was what happened in your first pregnancy was going to happen in your second and probably would happen in your third, fourth. Yeah. So it's ain't you, girl, you did nothing wrong. But two, I think but life is about lessons. And so even you reflecting back to the fact that your kids are the lesson for you. Yeah. Your kids are the thing, the precious reminders to like slow down, smell the roses, if you will.
True.
Means that like that textbook of life is full of important chapters. And so you're not taking that for granted. Beautiful.
That's true.
Tell me about labor. What was labor like? It sounds like you said with Tommy, you were hoping to go natural. So without an epidural, did you do like prep work beforehand? Were you working with a doula? Did you do birth classes, hypnobirth? Like how did you kind of go into preparing for labor?
Yeah. I wanted both a birth without an epidural, and I really both times wanted vaginal births. And so I talked to as many friends as I could who had that experience, 2 in particular who now each have 4 kids. And with most of them, I think only 1 out of the 8, 7 out of 8 of the kids were born vaginally without an epidural. So I talked to each of those girls a lot. And I actually kind of read the cliff notes of one of the books that one of the women had really loved that talked about that. I did go to a birth class. For whatever reason, the one that was recommended to me was actually an online one that I paid for, but that's the one I attended with Pedro. I'm not sure he really wanted to be there, but he did it for me. And in that class, there was an entire episode about vaginal births without epidurals. And so I saw a woman screaming through it on the video, and I was like, yeah, okay, sign me up. And, I did Kegels and maybe, I think I also did a few other exercises that I'd like heard, can kind of help along with both of those things. Neither of those things were to be. And I would say that this many years out, I know it's not logical. I know it serves no purpose, but there's still a part of me that wonders, like, if I had done something different, or if things had been different, would it have gone a different direction? And intellectually, I think the answer is no, but I just wanted that type of birth. And should I talk about the labor?
Yeah, if you feel comfortable, I'd love for it to hear about your labor story.
So with Tommy, Pedro had he didn't go to Colorado that week because we were basically in week 40, but he had worked like a dog that week and we were both very tired. And we went to bed around 11, the lights went off and I went horizontal and all of a sudden I felt a gush and I was like, and I sat up and he was like, what? I was like, I'll be right back. And I went to the bathroom and saw what was happening and was pretty sure that my water had broken. And I went in and I was like, hey, I think my water broke. So I think it's go time. And he goes, right now? Are you serious? And I was like, yeah, I don't think the baby is like checking how tired you are. So we went downstairs. He had a bad attitude for like 10 seconds and then he turned it around. But we went downstairs and called, the line that was on our refrigerator and explained. And they were like, sounds like probably it was your water, but come on in. I was not having contractions at all. I never had Braxton Hicks. So that was sort of the first sign. And we went in and tested the fluid and they said, yes, in fact, your water has broken. And I knew that kind of put me on the clock because you can't have your water broken for too long until you're at high infection risk. So, and they knew that I'd had hypertension for 4 weeks. So they were like, look, there's no point in waiting for anything. So let's start with a half misoprostol, right? Yeah. And I looked at that little pill. I guess it wasn't a half, but I remember thinking this is half the size of a birth control pill. Like this thing's going to do nothing, which I understand pharmacologically is idiotic. And they were like, look, what tends to happen is, especially for the first birth, you have this, we'll wait 4 to 6 hours, assuming that not much at all has happened, you'll sleep, assuming not much at all has happened, we'll take another one, and then maybe still nothing's happening, and then you'll take another one. And I popped that little sucker, and then literally 10 minutes later, the nurse was still kind of fiddling around with stuff, and I go, was that a contraction? And she was like, yes, your body is reacting really quickly. And I mean, I went from 0 to contractions, in 10 minutes, and then they never stopped.
Yeah.
So this whole idea of like, have one more night's sleep, for the next 18 years was not to be. So I had contractions throughout the night. Well, no, until kind of middle of the night. And then they were really happening, and we never had to go to Pitocin or any other form of induction, because I was, I don't think I was yet 10 centimeters dilated, but I was on that path and having mega contractions very frequently. And then, then I was
still doing this all unmedicated at this point, like
yes.
No pain medications.
Correct.
Go.
Yes. And then they were like, you know what, maybe walk around. That helps things move, keep moving. It also gets you, the blood flowing. Let's go. So I remember walking, having contractions in the hallway, putting my hands on the wall, doing the groans, which was a weird and new experience to be so public with what I was experiencing. And then we went out to the little garden area, and I just puked. And I was like, I don't know what's happening here. And from then on out, it was like every few contractions I was throwing up or gagging. And I remember this nurse who was a very straight shooter in how she communicated. But I respect how she said this. She came to me, and at this point I was back in the hospital room throwing up and contracting and screaming and whatever. And she was like, would you like to reassess your pain management strategy? And it was just a very nice way to say, like, this is insane. So I said, yes, I would. And she said, okay. And I said, let's try the laughing gas, right? And so we did that for, I don't know how long, because time was wonky, but it made me even more nauseous, because to put something on my face that felt hot and sweaty and started to smell like my throw up because I was taking off to throw up, whatever, was like, ugh. And then she, I don't know how much later, said, would you like to reassess your pain management approach again? And I said, yes, let's go with the epidural. And the anesthesiologist came in, and I will say, compared to my second one, it was like a perfect placement of the epidural. I mean, I didn't experience pain. She seemed to have hit the spot. It all worked really well, so that, and then an hour later, I felt great. And I actually said to Pedro, I said, if ever the epidural company wants a representative, like advertisements, like, sign me up, this is amazing. And then I actually took a nap, which was a godsend, even while I was contracting the whole time. But I needed, a little bit of that. And then I woke up, and I mean, I was 10 centimeters, contractions were through the roof.
Perfect.
Boom, boom, boom. And it was go time. And I remember at that point, it was, I want to say like 10:50 or 11 p.m. So at that point, I'd had contractions for basically 24 hours. And the nurse practitioner said, I think that you can have this baby today. And so I looked at the clock, and I was like, oh, great. Like, this baby's going to come like in basically an hour. 3 hours later, I was still pushing my brain. Oh, well, I will say, less than an hour into pushing, they said, I can see her head. She's got a lot of hair. So again, I was like, oh, great. Like, this is going to fly by. This baby's shooting out. But for the next 2 hours, I made no progress. She just, they still just saw that part of the head. And the OB increasingly, and I love this OB so much, she increasingly was saying, like, we're going to start to think about going to a C-section. And I was like, can I keep going? And she was like, yes, at this point, the baby's not in danger. You're not in danger. Like, yep. And she also said, she was like, I've never seen someone pushing like such a maniac. Like, keep going. Like, let's try this. And then right as we approached 4 hours of me pushing with every contraction, that's when her tone changed. And she was like, I now think we're putting the baby under stress and you. And so, like, you can give it a few more pushes, but after that, we're going to a C-section. And I gave my pushes with all my heart. And I truly still thought, like, great, these are the final pushes. Like, here comes, I can do this because I'm an athlete and I'm a doer and I, whatever. And I was really attached to having a vaginal birth. and I pushed, my brains out and no progress. And no one realized, but the whole time with every push, my eyes were closed. And so not only did I burst all the blood vessels here, but there were pools of blood at the bottom of my eyes. And so finally, when the doctor said, Dr. DuPont, my love, she said, now I highly recommend we go to a C-section. And by the way, the whole time Pedro was like, I don't care how we get a healthy baby and a healthy mommy. Like epidural, yes, no. C-section, yes, no. And he was amazing. And he was running laps. I was so hot that he always had a wet compress in the fridge and always one on my forehead. And when that got hot, he was switching. He was incredible.
Yeah.
But then she said, it's at this point that I highly recommend, like my medical recommendation is that we go to a C-section. I was just so devastated because, 24 hours of contractions. It ended up being 4.5 hours of pushing. And, then they called in the anesthesiologist, who was a different woman because they'd changed. And she came in and she saw my eyes and she was, oh my God, you look awful. And I was like, okay. But helpful. It's because she'd never seen like a face blow up like that.
Yeah.
So they prepped me for the OR. Pedro was there and it was scary because we'd never done anything even remotely like that. To the anesthesiologist's credit, after she realized that wasn't great bedside manner, she then became amazing and she was giving me a facial massage as I was being prepped in the OR, which was incredible. I did start convulsing, which I've now learned is not that uncommon because of all the medication.
You say convulsing like you were like having a seizure? Or you mean shaking?
But like shaking like full body. I don't know if you would call it.
Yeah. Okay.
I was with it.
No, the only reason why, like, obviously, like, this is me being not your friend, but an OB, like, convulsing is actually another term for seizure. And when someone has preeclampsia, a seizure is really serious. But you're right, the shaking, the full body shakes.
Okay. Sorry.
Is different.
Yeah. Full body shakes.
Yeah, the full. Okay. Now, I just want to make sure you didn't seize. That's a big deal.
No. Yeah, got it. Yes. I know what you mean now. No, just full body shaking.
Yeah.
And emotional. I was crying and, whatever. And then they did the C-section and Tommy came out and, of course I'm listening. And first Dr. DuPont said, oh my gosh, she is so alert. I've never had a baby make eye contact like this. But then again, I heard the tone changed and I didn't hear it cry. And so you could just hear these sort of medical terms flying around and sort of, quick things happening. And I was saying, like, I'm cut open, I'm lying there. And I was like, is the baby okay? And they weren't responding. And I said, is the baby okay? And I said it a few times. And I said, Dr. DuPont, is the baby okay? And she said, we think she'll be okay. So I was like, oh my God. And then Pedro and I had agreed well before that if for some reason we should be separated, such as the baby goes to the NICU and I stay in the OR, he will go with the baby. So he did, which was the right thing, but also like, oh my God, you're leaving me with my insides open and if the baby's okay and whatever. So he went with Tommy and, and had his moments with her while I was recovering. And then they brought me to Tommy for skin to skin and to try to start to breastfeed. And I was in there, obviously, after beyond exhaustion. And this pediatric neurologist came in and said, blah, blah, blah. I don't remember anything except like, and there might be, how did he say it? Something about developmental problems, with the brain. And I said, are you saying that my daughter might have brain damage? And he just said, that's what we're looking for. Might be. And I was like, and so I was like, I gotta go, like take me to my husband. And I went to Pedro and he was sleeping and I woke him up and I was like, the neurologist just said Tommy might have brain damage. And he started putting on his sweatshirt. I was like, what are you going to do? He's like, I'm going to march in there and get some answers. And, the guy was already gone. We didn't have answers. And meanwhile, my whole family is waiting. Like, what's happening? We know Tommy's in labor. Is she okay? My mom's flying from the East Coast. And we couldn't say that she was okay. So my whole family thinks, who knows what has happened. And it was a few hours until finally someone came in and I was like, what's happening with the brain development and the balance of acids, et cetera. And they're it's clear. And I was like, it's clear, like zero, like forget we ever had that conversation. And they're like, yes, 100% in the clear. And I was like, I mean, thank God, but also like, what kind of, communication is that?
Yeah.
So that was that.
That was that. No, I mean, there's so much I'm reflecting on with that story. Like, first, just trying to hold you in that space. Obviously, I like have played with Tomi and done bedtime tales with her, and she's like great and happy and well. But to have two parents at the moment they bring like life into this world, like life that they know is so precious and so new and vulnerable, and being like swept from like hopefully a joyous moment into like a deep like unknown. I wouldn't wish that for anyone. And I think very selfishly, when I hear stories like yours, I reflect on like how the healthcare system can do you better. I hear your story and I'm like, okay, where did their failures, where were their successes? Like, the anesthesiologist turning around and giving you the TLC you deserved, your OB, believing in you, cheering you on, saying, hey, as long as baby's okay, I'm going to give you a shot, but also being honest that she, didn't think the likelihood of success was high enough. But then, the bigger failures, and no offense to this person, we all work shifts and it's hard and we're tired, but being really mindful when you're talking to new parents. And I understand what he was. I think I kind of, medically understand that he's probably just saying, hey, we're doing these tests to just make sure she's okay. We think she's probably okay, but but saying, oh yeah, well, we're ruling out neurological deficits or, developmental delay, whatever. Like, yes, that is not what a new parent needs to hear.
And I said acids, but it was gases. It was that he wasn't confident with the gases. And and when I was trying to go into like solution mode, I was like, okay, like, and he was like, so we might need to upgrade to, a higher level NICU. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, if and when we do that, can we please go to Stanford? I wanted to go south instead of north, just because that's the system I'm more comfortable in, and et cetera. And he said, no, we'd go to my NICU, which is in the city in San Francisco. And I was like, okay, so I have like no say in this scary time. Yeah. So I can picture him, because I agree with you. He's human. Maybe his cat died that morning. I mean, maybe that was the most direct way he had to actually scare me so that I knew that this was serious or whatever. But it was a horrible experience. It was terrifying after, I have hormones going wild and I'm exhausted. The two other things I really remember, because we were in the hospital while Tomi was still in the NICU, though, okay. And a day or two later, they were more focused on the jaundice. One was breastfeeding, which is a whole thing, but also my OB did come visit when Tomi was 3 or 4 days old. I was so happy to see her and all this. And I said, I'm curious, what would have happened if I had refused to have a C-section, or if we were in the many parts of the world where that's not a possibility? And her face went kind of dark and she was like, bad things. And I was like, I want to know, like, that's just me and I want to know and I can handle it. And she said, that baby would have died inside of you and you might have died pushing. She said, because the size of her head, both the kids have humongous heads, thanks to Pedro, and because of the shape of your pelvis, she was like, I don't see how that baby ever would have come out. And she said, I don't actually know, but I think that the baby was sunny side up. Is that the way, right? The whole time. And I had like really hip centric contractions. Anyway, and she said, I don't think that you would have had a good outcome, either of you. So I guess hearing that was scary, but also made me feel, even though who cares, but made me feel justified in having had a C-section.
Of course. I mean, I think that what I always say, at least as an OB, is that there's two beautiful ways to be born. There's the vaginal birth and an abdominal birth. And I think we have to kind of move away from saying like, one is the normal way and the other way is the abnormal, right? Because then you pathologize two ways to be coming into the world. We have a tendency to make those women who have to or choose to, because some women choose to have a cesarean delivery, we make them feel bad, we make them feel guilt, we make them feel shame. And recognizing that in modern obstetrics, and the reason why we have such low like neonatal like death outcomes, low maternal mortality outcomes is in truth because interventions that can be life-saving, right? That, there were in hundreds of years ago, and probably not in pretty recently, like you said, in other communities or countries where they don't have access to obstetric care, where these things do happen. But it really is, when I think about that patient who comes to see me for the very first appointment, everyone wants this like utopic delivery experience. They want the natural, normal birth, unmedicated, right? The sense of like, that's what our bodies are supposed to do. And I champion that. I support that. But I also champion acceptance and vulnerability.
Do what you need to do.
And recognizing that it's at some point along the way, that straight shooter nurse that I really appreciate. At some point along the way, the conversation is going to be, okay, and what do you need now, right? Because the Nyssa in that moment was different from the Nyssa 4 weeks prior or 4 months prior, right? Yes. What do you need now?
That's so true.
But it's hard. I mean, I know from hearing this story several times how hard you work. Physically, people who were in that room saw how hard you worked. But if you're talking about, and I say this out of respect to Pedro, if he's listening, my husband too has a well-proportioned head. That head, but you're thinking about like head to pelvis ratios. You're thinking about sunny side up.
Those noggins.
So that's, those noggins, sunny side up. So occiput posterior. So the back of the baby's head was at the back of your spine. And the way I describe it to patients is the way it was described to me when I was a learner. And I really liked that imagery was it's way easier to crawl out of a tunnel, like on hands and knees, but crawling out of a tunnel on your back isn't that feasible, right? And so all it is about the diameter of a baby's head. And so a baby's head is much smaller when they're able to look and crunch down and look at mom's back.
That makes sense.
But most sunny side up babies are like looking up. And so like their widest heads are looking up and around. And so the widest part of their head is getting stuck against the bones. So you had many like objective pieces that hopefully, as you reflect, 4.5 years later, that prove you tried your darndest.
Yeah, I did.
And it wasn't going to happen, but she was born in a way that kept you and her healthy and safe. As a fellow C-section baby, you good.
You turned out pretty great. You're pretty great.
Yeah. And she's great. So I'd like to take a moment to tell you that this is my passion project based on years of experience as an OB/GYN doctor. I aim to empower moms and moms-to-be and those in the pregnancy and postpartum care space. If you appreciate what I do, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share with your friends so it could reach more people like you. You can visit goldenhour.fm for more information, resources, and all other episodes. If you have any requests, suggestions, or questions for future episodes, please email me at hello@goldenhour.fm or leave us a comment at goldenhour.fm on Instagram. Well, thank you for reflecting on that. I hope that sharing this story now 4.5 years later, I hope that every time you share that story, it reminds you of your strength. It reminds you of the love and support of Pedro, your awesome OB, Dr. DuPont. There's probably some sadness and mourning in there, but I hope that your main takeaway is something positive.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really feel for the women who gave birth during the, few months of craziness of COVID when they couldn't have anyone in the room. I cannot imagine going through that experience without Pedro there. It would have been lonely and terrifying. And without love and care, like the smallest act of always having a cold compress on my forehead became my whole world because my world was so small. My world was like the only thing that I was conscious of were the contractions and how hot I was. And so, that was it was everything to me.
Yeah. I think I happened to be on call this past weekend and, the nature of our job is that we care for so many birthing people who come in with these like illustrious birth plans.
Of course.
And then
I had one.
Things take a turn. They take a turn. And we in that conversation I have, and I feel honored working with people I work with because we have these conversations and we are able to reflect that that birth can sometimes be traumatic, like, right?
Oh my God.
I think it's billed as this like very happy thing.
Yeah.
Like we have baby showers
Right.
and you know, what's the sips, or sprinkles. That's what you do when you have another one. Yeah. We have all these little parties and games and, you know, Instagram, you post your belly growing like this all,
Yes.
it truly is happy. But I think there are so many patients who share with us either trauma from their first birth or their second birth, or fears related to that, or trauma in their pregnancies. And you have to reflect on that. Wow, these are people who otherwise were so healthy, never really had to access the healthcare system ever, had an expectation of how things were going to go, and surprises that for us as OBs, doctors or midwives were like, oh, I mean, that happens. Like you shared about the preeclampsia. Oh yeah, that happens.
Right.
For you and your body, that didn't just happen. That happens.
Yeah.
And just recognizing that.
I mean, to your point, probably at the I don't know, is there a 32 or 33 week appointment? Or, I was with Dr. DuPont, and she was no longer doing anything but planned C-sections for her own personal health reasons. And I was so upset about it because I only wanted to be with her because I felt safe with her. But anyway, she was still my sort of OB when I went to the office visits most of the time. And I was talking to her about that I hoped to have a VBAC. And I just started bawling about but what if this happens? And what if I get in the same situation? And I was really scared. And she said, and I appreciated that she was kind of the mirror. She was like, I had no idea you were carrying this type of PTSD from your first labor. Mm-hmm. And she had all the time in the world for me to talk through it. And it was really, in a way, it was helpful for her to say that term because, I'm so lucky that I've never been in traumatizing situations that for someone to say you have PTSD from something was felt foreign. But to hear her kind of label it or at least acknowledge it, I was like, oh my God, I'm terrified about labor the second time around.
Yeah. No, and I think there are so many things that have inspired me to create this podcast and this podcast community, but it truly is for birthers to not feel so alone, to recognize that experience, whether it's, the unexpected C-section, the new diagnosis of hypertension, whatever it is, other people experience it. Because I think just like Dr. DuPont, we meet patients one-on-one in these really intimate moments. And we try to put our arms around those patients physically and spiritually, emotionally. Yeah. Oftentimes patients carry this aloneness in that moment. Yeah. And I think feeling not so alone in itself is so important, but also just having someone verbalize and recognize, oh yeah, that you went through some shit. You went through something really real.
Exactly.
And my job, I'm so lucky. My job and conversations like this, I think, hopefully people there agree, I think made me a better clinician, because I think knowing that what for me is a run of the mill, oh yeah, that was an emergency. I dealt with that emergency so quick and great. Knowing that actually for that, it wasn't a quick, easy fix that was life altering for them, means that after every kind of acute event that happens in the hospital, I'm thinking about my recent call shift over the weekend. I sit with those patients. I sit with their partners. I hug their partners. I hug those patients. And I sit with this moment of recognizing this was traumatic.
Right.
And you're going to sit with this for a while. And it might hit you in waves. It might not hit you for another year. It might not hit you until you're pregnant again. But this was real. And when you're ready to talk about it more, talk with your OB or make an appointment with me, because it's our duty as those who care for birthers and their support people to sit in those moments so deeply. I'm glad you had Dr. DuPont.
I love her. I was so mad that she semi-retired. Now she's fully retired, but she deserves her full life.
Yes.
You were just making me remember that one of Pedro's friends, who has 4 kids, every year on each kid's birthday, he and his wife tell that respective kid his or her birth story, about the labor or whatever. And I've thought about that, and I've been I think that would sound terrifying to a 4-year-old. I mean, already with Tiago, when Tommy was 2, I was explaining to her that, someone cut mommy open to get the baby out and whatever. And I mean, cut mommy open is like, I'm so nervous about knives around her that for her to conceptualize that, I think was very scary. So I really, was careful about how I described it. But I just think about, oh my gosh, if I were to take, and I see such beauty in that family tradition that they tell the birth story, but I don't know if that's something I want to share for many years until they can really sort of see the bigger picture.
Yeah. No, I respect that. Speaking of Tiago, you sounds like, and I know this, but for the audience, it sounds like you made that decision when you were pregnant with Tiago that you wanted to VBAC. So vaginal birth after C-section, VBAC, yes. Or us OBs call it TOLAC. So trial of labor after C-section. Yes.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah. VBAC is once you've done it. TOLAC, yes. Trial of labor is because you're going to try. We're going to give it an effort. What went into your decision to try to have a VBAC?
Yeah. One, it was my completely unfounded and ridiculous attachment to wanting to have a vaginal birth. And I hear you. We need to completely get away from that in society, because what is the point? And who was in the same practice as Dr. DuPont, she basically put my data into a program. I think it's from the University of Michigan.
The VBAC calculator.
Yes.
Yes.
To see, and I was so excited because I love math and stats and, great, this is going to give me the answer. And then, of course, the answer was like 52% likely to have a VBAC. Forget the TOLAC. And I mean, there's no less helpful answer, right? Except that she said, look, I guess this helps to say, give it a whirl if that's important to you.
Yeah.
And then she sort of added to that and gave more color to the data of like, you are still your shape. Your husband is still his shape. Ultimately, it was geometry of a huge head in a heart-shaped small, which I find romantic that I have a heart-shaped pelvis, but in a heart-shaped small petite pelvis. That's not changing, but the baby might be in a different position. The baby might have a different head and blah, blah, blah. So, if you want to try. So try, I did. It was not to be.
But I think it's great that you tried, and it makes sense that you tried, right? That I agree with your OB. The calculator helps having some objective data, but you never know, right? That with Tommy, sounds like she was sunny side up. So maybe Tiago was going to be facing your spine. Maybe Tiago was going to have your family's heads. Yeah. Who knows?
Turns out he looks exactly like my husband in shrunken form. He
does, and that's why we love him. But I think it was worth the try. How without the full labor story this time, but when you got to what we call the second stage, what you got to the pushing stage, how was it for you this time? Was your mentality or your approach different? Yeah.
And maybe I'm going to break your rule and say that one other thing that I did like, both with my OB practice and with me going in a little bit more eyes wide open, is that, and I say this to other mothers who are like, I think I'm going to be induced on this and that date. I'm like, how are you going to be induced? And they're like, I don't know, I'm going to be induced. I'm like, there are actually different methods. And so you should learn about them and have a discussion if you have a preference. If you don't, who cares? But I wanted to know more. And I had a preference to ideally not do Pitocin. I've heard that it works, but also that you go talk about from zero to volcano. And I know that I couldn't have miso again. And so they said, like, we'll go to Pitocin. I was like, oh, are there other options? And she said, oh, yeah, actually, we could,
membrane sweep.
Thank you. We will start. Yes. We can start with the membrane sweep. I was like, great, get your finger up there.
Yeah.
She said, and, we could do a Cook's balloon. And it wasn't what she was originally going to recommend, just because her go-to was Pitocin. And I was like, what's this balloon? I love balloons. And she described it, and I was like, great, like, let's give that a whirl. And I am really happy that she let me have a say, and that I felt like I had some control over some of the decisions. And it went, all of that, up until the pushing part, everything went better than anyone could have hoped for, in that the membrane sweep did actually kickstart some things. And then they put the Cook's balloon in. And actually, that OB, who was not in my practice, but she was the one who was there at the time, I knew that she wasn't a big fan of the Cook's balloon, but she was like, it doesn't work that often. Pitocin always works, whatever. But she said, okay, we can give it a try. And she did it. And then she came in, later, once it was in, and she said, this is actually working really well. You're however many centimeters dilated. She then removed it, and she was like, you are still moving along. So even she was surprised that sort of the induction plan was progressing me better than anyone had hoped. And I got to 10 centimeters without Pitocin. So, I was kind of feeling like, wow, like so far everything is going as well as I could hope for it to. I was bouncing on my ball and all those things. Also, I think you know this, but my sister-in-law was in labor at the exact same time, which was super fun for us to trade experiences in the moment and be like, are you doing squats? I'll do squats. But then anyway, then it was time to push. Very soon they saw the head, and then an hour in, no progress. 2 hours in, no progress. And I was kind of like, this is the same story. And I said, do you think I have to already go to a C-section? And they said, no, again, like you are fine. The baby is fine so far. And I said to Pedro, because he was watching this whole movie all over again, supportive in whatever way, but I said, I'm going to give it another half hour. And sure enough, I pushed like a banshee for another half hour. And again, the doctor said, I'm open to you still pushing if that's what you prefer. And I said, honestly, do you think that this baby will come out vaginally? And she said, no, I do not. And so I said, let's go. So, having gone through the first experience, you could say that I made a mature decision sooner.
Yeah.
And kind of knew what was to be when I was rolled into that OR. And that all felt like it went much more smoothly.
Was Tiago able to, I know with Tommy, she needed more help. She had to go to the NICU. So you guys were separated for those first couple, maybe an hour or so. With Tiago, was he okay? Was he able to do skin to skin with you and things like that in the operating room?
Yes. Not a little bit in the OR briefly.
Okay. Yeah.
But they felt like, I guess they had to like sew me up. He did go to the NICU, and he was in the NICU for also like, I think 5 days or so, but that was from the get-go for the jaundice. And not that means you're out of the woods, but I get the sense that it's something they deal with a lot. Actually, no, that's not true. The first 2 nights he slept in my room. And then by day 3, when we were sort of like, okay, are we wrapping up? They were like, no, actually, we're still not happy with where his bilirubin is. Now he's going to the NICU, and you've probably got a few more days ahead of you. I just remember that because, adjust the facts, he was in my room for 3 nights, and then we were going to go home, and then he went to the NICU. Here's why I remember. Because the first night was the first night, and it's joyful, and breastfeeding is easy, which is a pleasure, and all these things. Second night, I pulled an all-nighter. I mean, talk about cluster feed mania. I pulled an all-nighter. There was no time when I slept more than 20 minutes. And so then, as we were approaching night 3, the nurse, who was, a traveling nurse, and I'm sure she was having a bad night or whatever, she came in, and I was like, I'm really, really nervous for this night. I am so tired. I did not sleep last night. Can you please help with diaper changes, after the feed? And like, do you have any suggestions about, this night or whatever? And she's like, that's how it is. Babies are hungry. And I was like, and so, and I guess because my expectations were, in the basement about like, okay, here comes another all-nighter. He actually slept pretty well that night, and it was blissful and beautiful and wonderful. Other than we then found out that Pedro was going to take 0 paternity leave, but that was a whole other thing. And then he went to the NICU, I think for 3 or 4 nights to manage his bilirubin. Maybe I'm not supposed to say this because I think nurseries are out of fashion, but the beauty of a good NICU is I truly slept for the 2 hours in between feeds. I knew he was in great hands. I love the NICU nurses, especially the lady from France, who is such a sweetheart. And they would call me, and I would walk down the hall and breastfeed, and it was a lovely experience. And then they'd do the whole, change diaper, reswaddle, get them all comfy, and then I'd go sleep again. So that was kind of great.
Yeah.
Knowing that and I'm so lucky because he was in the NICU while he was like pretty close to okay. They weren't nervous. They just knew that they had to manage his bilirubin, and I was sleeping. So it was great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think the the people who work in the NICU, especially NICU nurses, they're a special breed. They're angels, because you're right. They care for patients who have babies who are like very high risk, and it's really scary and it's really touch and go. But they also care for the kiddos who need extra help, and those women, they get it. They see you, and they're like, well, we've got this. Just feed this baby.
They're lovely. Oh my God. She made like arts and crafts projects that, like a sign, because it was coming up on Halloween. There was a Halloween themed Tiago sign. I mean, they're a dream.
Oh, that's special. And and you didn't break any rules. I actually appreciated you giving highlights about your induction process, because you're right. There's many different ways to approach induction. There are scenarios where we make our recommendations. There's scenarios when there's the patients come in with their own opinions or desires, and
Dr.
then
Google.
the goal meeting. Dr. Google, Nurse TikTok, my favorite people, no, my arch nemesis. But then we meet in the middle. And agency is so important. And I was hearing you talk about the OB being like, oh, well, there is this Cook's balloon, but it doesn't work, which is hilarious, because our protocols often involve the balloon, because the balloon actually data proves works really well.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I love to hear that.
So many different ways. There's so many different ways to do what we do. And that's why medicine is not so much a science as it is truly an art.
Yeah.
And so I respect that.
Yeah.
But glad that you went in informed. And I'm glad that you in your pushing stage had that movie reel playing again, that for better or for worse, you were just like, hey, I can have agency in this moment to say, we're done. Like, I know I'm fine and the baby's fine, but we're done.
Yeah.
We can end here.
Happen.
I feel I gave it my all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, there's so much more I want to talk to you about. And so I'm trying to pick and choose. I think something that I would love to talk about was kind of your postpartum experience with Tomi. A reason why is because with the first kiddo, it's a bit different, right? Because there's so much that you're figuring out.
Yeah.
What were who were your support people? What was your village like? What kept you standing and convinced you that you would want to have another child because it wasn't that bad? Mom Nyssa.
My mom, Pedro, my aunt, and a night nurse for a few nights. And I remember it like sequentially, because Pedro was there for the first 2 weeks, and he was amazing and had just the cutest attitude and obsession with Tomi. Like, thought that her sneezes were the funniest thing, and just loved changing the diaper, and just thought it was all so cute. My mom was there also for the first 2 weeks, if I'm getting this right. And then my mom had her own life, and Pedro had to start going back to Colorado. And my aunt could come, I think, in the 4th week. And I was totally freaked out about being the only person with this baby alone in California. Mm-hmm. And we hemmed and hawed about, a night nurse option, and then went for it. Thank goodness, because Maria showed up, and that day I'd been alone with Tomi all day. And that was the day, of course, when Tomi did not take a nap for the whole day. And so Maria showed up at like 7 or 8 p.m. and I am so tired. And I think my eyeballs were popping out of my face. And I'm like this when Maria showed up, and she was a godsend, like many night nurses are. And she was like, I'm going to take this baby and you're going to go to sleep. And I was like, okay, but you're going to wake me up in 2 hours because her next, and she was like, I actually think that you're going to sleep through this feed, and there's milk in the fridge. And then I think that in 6 hours, you're going to resume feeding. And I was like, but then I'll lose all milk supply for the rest of ever. And, my baby. And she was like, I am very confident your milk supply will be fine. And you need sleep. And if you don't sleep, your body doesn't produce milk. So I'm going to wake you up in 6 hours. Oh my God. And it was amazing. So I needed her. I needed my mom there when she was there. I needed Pedro whenever he was there. I needed my aunt when she was there. And the two things I remember being hard, I mean, obviously so much of it was magical, although I did experience it being much more magical with Tiago just because it was my second. But the two hard things that come back, one is for probably 4 or 5 days, but what felt like 4 or 5 years, Tomi wouldn't latch on a dry nipple. And so we called it Dippin' Dots. Either Pedro or my mom would drop, breast milk from the fridge, put literally a drop of it on my nipple, a drop of it on my nipple until Tommy would probably smell that. And then she would latch and then we were fine. But at 3 a.m. to like be doing this, eyedropper nonsense was like maddening. So my mom was amazing and so patient with that. And then the other thing is I remember like dreading the nights because I did find it with Tommy, not with Tiago, but with Tommy, I found it very lonely. To be the one that was feeding at 11 p.m. and then 2 a.m. and then 5 a.m. and everyone else, in most scenarios was sleeping. And it was scary because it was my first and I'm hoping I'm doing the breastfeeding thing correctly and I'm going to change diapers and swaddle and hope the baby goes to sleep, whatever. And it being in darkness with all the hormones was really lonely. And so then daylight would come when another human would be around, whether it was my mom or Pedro at the beginning or my aunt. And of course, all of them would be like, you should take a nap now. And I was like, I am not taking a nap now. This
I want
is
to
the first time
interact
I
with
feel
all of you
human.
guys.
And there's someone to talk to me other than a baby. And there's life and there's food and there's a walk and there's sunlight. And then 8 p.m. would roll around and I would just be like, oh my God, here we go again. So I just remember that loneliness.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's real. I mean, I've said this before, but I remember a lot of the conversations we've had. And I think one of the early conversations we had now, probably at least a year plus ago, was you sharing with me like that nighttime feed loneliness. It's like an intimate moment with your baby and it's beautiful day after day after day after day. Like, yeah, you're by yourself and Tommy wasn't up to chatting with you quite yet. She didn't have no words.
Exactly.
Now she has many words, many feels, and many words. And so I honestly, when I thought about creating this podcast, I thought about at 3 a.m. I thought about a mom sitting there being like, ear pod in, baby on the breast, listening to this and hopefully not feeling nearly as alone and hearing someone share that, hey, I felt this too. This is real.
I really like when 8 p.m. rolled around, I was like, oh my God, here it goes again. It's hard. It's scary, I think, as a first mom to hope that you're doing everything right. And I'm so lucky that I had a village. So if, God forbid, something had gone wrong, I would wake Pedro up. I would wake my mom up. I'd wake whoever was up and I'd have help. A lot of women do not have that. And oh my God, I can't imagine how lonely that feels. But yeah, that was hard. And again, it felt totally different with Tiago.
Why? Yeah, I was going to ask you, why did it feel different with Tiago? It's still the middle of the night. You're still up with him. What?
Totally about well, I think it was two things. One is expectations. So with Tommy, I mean, intellectually, I understand when the doctor tells me this baby needs to eat every 2 to 3 hours. So wake the baby up and do that. That means that when all is said and done, the mom might sleep for 20 minutes and you get better at it and whatever. But even so, when Tommy would cluster feed or, when I would actually fall into a deep sleep and then she'd cry, I would be like, oh my God, again? Like, I feel like I just drifted off. Whereas with Tiago, I would put that little guy down and be like, see you in 2 hours, and I'm going to sleep as best I can for 2 hours and then we'll be back at it again. See you then.
Yeah.
And it was just, so expectations changed completely. And I knew he was my last. So I was like, these are the cuddles. These are the giggles, the feels, the intimate time. I mean, to this day, he's much more physically affectionate than Tommy. Maybe it's nature, but it feels like it must partly be nurture because I just was like all up in him with all the, and I treasured that time with him. Like, and Pedro was kind of the opposite. He was like, he needs to eat again. And I was like, yeah, it's been 3 hours. Like, this is it. And I just knew, and I loved it. I read books the whole time. I was like a voracious reader. I knew I needed to read happy books. I usually read really scary or depressing books, but I was like, give me something about unicorns and rainbows and I am up for it. Because I knew that, hormones do bring you down and I didn't want scary things and whatever. But I can picture myself in the two sort of nursing setups we had. We were in different houses. And with the Tiago, I picture that setup in a really warm and fuzzy, cuddly way. And I did not mind at all, really, waking up at 3 a.m. for the next feed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that perspective switch that I reflect on this so much as I've now cared for, it's probably like tens of thousands of people.
Isn't it crazy?
And it's a lot. It's a lot. It's such an honor. And in those conversations, you have a lot of second, third time moms who are just like, I see them for postpartum visits. They're like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm great. Life's good. Are we done? Like, got it.
Yeah.
Totally breezy baby. And there's probably so many different reasons, right? But it's expectation, it's experience, it's your lived wisdom. It's being, knowing more about when to call on your people in your village, right? Saying like, hey, I don't actually have to do this all on my own. I have nothing to prove. And I also just want to reflect on the moms who find it harder because, as kids become more and more independent, you then are rearing two kids, not one. Yeah. And it's like, oh, how do I give my love and attention to both? And this one feels jealousy. And then there's that conflict as well, right? That exists second time around, third time around.
Yes. And too. It's the second time on your body. And for some women, the third and the fourth and the fifth. And my, as you know, because I talk to you about it a lot, my physical recovery from the second C-section went much worse. And so, I was combating that. All things considered, I healed pretty well in both. I hear horror stories of women being bedridden and all these things, but yeah, they're tougher things the second time around for sure. But for me, the second time around was just emotionally much more manageable, and I knew it was my last, so I just cherished it. And there's a lot to be said for knowing how to breastfeed. I remember the early days in the hospital with Tomi when the lactation consultants, who I think are fantastic at Mills Peninsula, I really adore them, and they helped me through a lot. But they would use a language that I didn't understand. And I just remember, I've said this to you probably before, but I remember them being like, well, has she latched? I'm like, what's a latch? And how would I know that? And then she was like, and how's your letdown? And I'm like, you're letting me down. I don't know what the hell that means. And then the second time around, you're like, great, there's a latch. I can feel my letdown. Okay. I can feel filling and the whole thing. I remember the first feed with Tiago in my hospital bed. I was like, oh, boop, boop, and it was like, I guess that's not helpful for a podcast. Take baby, put towards boob, position, done. He's eating. And that was not the case with Tomi.
Yeah. Of course. She's figuring out, she's never had to feed before. She used to have that placenta just giving her everything she needed through her belly button.
Yeah.
Now she's uses her mouth.
And then a resort town.
Physically. Yeah, resort time, just literally laying back. Yeah.
She's floating.
Food infused into her, floating in like a beautiful, lukewarm bath. Yeah, it's amazing. That's why a lot of kids don't want to leave. And then meanwhile, you are just use the physical mechanics of okay, my nipple, my breast, the shape of my breast. Do I hold my baby this way, upside down?
Awkward.
There's so many different ways.
Yeah.
And that's why we're going to have, lactation consultants on this show.
Yes.
And that's, again, this is as much for the audience as for me, right? That there's so much in obstetrics in terms of supporting birthers and their support people, but we also don't know everything, right? As OBGYNs, we're great. We we can keep you well in your pregnancy. We can deliver babies, but football hold versus side straddle, all these terminologies for me, where every time I'm in awe of our lactation consultants in our community. And every time I hear them speak with our patient groups, I'm listening and be like, taking notes, okay, this is great. You're brilliant. And they are brilliant. And now you know all the lingo. This has been amazing. Literally can talk to you for hours more. I have you got you back on the pod, if you will, because there's still so much to talk about. But you, as I've shared before, you are an expert in your own right, whether it's what you learned from Tomi and bringing that in to your pregnancy and postpartum experience with Tiago and everything else in between. What are your final words for either anyone who's listening, who's considering being pregnant, currently pregnant, newly postpartum, any words of wisdom or encouragement you want to leave us with?
First of all, I think your insight is such a good one, which is, let's stop using terminology to indicate that any which way to have a baby is superior to the other. And I do actually think, like, for my cousins and my friends who have had their first birth after mine, like, I don't really think this is probably not a great advertisement for your podcast because I love this idea, but I think it's really hard to share a birth story with a first-time mom before she's, with a first-time pregnant woman, because you don't know what your birth story will be. To your point, birth plans, should be used as fire starters, and you don't know until you're in it. And so just sort of take it as it comes and I know that there are magical parts and there are really hard parts, and that's the whole shebang. I also think now we're talking about it a lot more, as a society, but like hormones are so real. And one thing I said to Pedro early on postpartum when I had Tommy, when I was so emotional about who knows what, and I thought the world was ending and whatever, it actually did seem like it was ending at some point when it was COVID plus the forest fires. So it was like dark all day in California. Yeah. So it did feel like Armageddon, but more, on other days, I said to him, I said, even though we can attribute this emotion to the hormones, that is real for me. And that is my reality. And this is my biological status quo. And so we have to just take it for what it is. And he was supportive the whole time. So it wasn't a speech to him. We might say, well, that's the hormones, but it's almost like, how do we say that differently to be like, that's the hormones. Like, that's your body with a completely different makeup for good evolutionary biological reasons. And we have to honor that and protect the mom for that. And I guess the only other thing, you said it early on, is like, everybody needs a village. It's absurd, how modern society turned towards, a woman should do everything herself and doesn't live near her family and, whatever, night nurses are a crutch and all this stuff. Like, no. Like, for almost all of human history, you actually had a village with wet nurses and with aunts who you don't even know if it's your aunt or your cousin or your mom, and a million siblings. And so totally agree with what you said early on, which is like, accept all the loving help that you could possibly want. That, like, even just having my mom around and patient and loving and understanding, even if she never touched Tommy, which she did, and even if she never touched Tiago, which she did, it gave me so much energy. I guess I just thought of one more. One of my friends, one of the ones who has had 4 kids, she said pretty early on, she said, even at times when Pedro doesn't feel like he can do much for the baby, because he physically can't when you're breastfeeding, he can do so much for you. And I love that, because he could give me a back rub. He could say, go take a walk. You need some vitamin D without this baby attached to you. Do you want Oreo ice cream? All that adds up. And so we need to, I think, as a society, take care of the mother as much as we take care of the baby.
Yeah. No, well said. I think recreating that village in an semi-organic way, whether it's relying on the people that you biologically are related to, the chosen family that is friends, and then the people that are in service in the birthing space that we're so grateful for, doulas, night nurses, lactation specialists, all these people who are trying to create like a version of what naturally was occurring in our society, hundreds of years ago. It's a shame that creating some of these things are expensive.
I know.
But I hope, I have, there's a very idealistic version of me that's like, maybe there is this like postpartum, utopia where
like volunteer
all
corps.
These things, where all these things can exist, at varying price points for patients or not at all, or we don't even have time, but we can make time, or places like countries like in Europe, like Denmark and Finland and Germany, countries that actually do support families in their policies.
One country just gave grandparent leave, brand new. I
That's
forget
amazing.
which country. It just happened like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But there's now
Yeah.
grandparent leave for this exact reason.
Yeah. Yeah. It all makes sense. It all makes sense. But yeah, I mean, thank you again. I think
Thank you.
conversations like this remind me why this passion project I'm so passionate about, because I think that people like you, the amazing birthers have come before us and will come after us. We are what's holding up our society. And these are the people that deserve to be supported as best as we can. And so thank you for being so open and honest and hilarious and sharing your story. I miss you not only as a friend, but so grateful for you and the time that you've shared.
Thank you. And you've been my like private free on-call OBGYN when I'm like, why is this happening? What's this mean? So that's not the only reason you're my friend, but I really appreciate that you're always willing to, help me think through those things.
Anytime, girl. My free OBGYN advice means that I have a free place to stay when I visit you in Spain. Hey, so
to Casa de Amor.
Thank you. Thank you. But in all seriousness, again, appreciate you so much. Hope you have a great night. And thanks again.
Thank you. Bye. Talk to you soon.
Thank you very much for listening to The Golden Hour, the podcast community where moms and moms-to-be can hear stories from other mothers and learn from top experts in pregnancy and postpartum care. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share with your friends so we can reach more people like you. You can visit goldenhour.fm for more information, resources, and all other episodes. If you have any requests, questions, or suggestions for future episodes, please email me at hello@goldenhour.fm or leave us a comment at goldenhour.fm on Instagram. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Until then, stay golden.